Hi, this is Malia Cromer, Director of the Goucher College Poll, and you're listening to the Conduit Street Podcast, a source of news and notes on Maryland politics and policy viewed favorably by an overwhelming majority of Marylanders.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson and our producer and colleague, Victoria Maas. Michael and Victoria, how are you? Mostly Victoria. I know how Michael is. Victoria, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I have recovered from our election blog coverage. Busy time for us, for sure. But it's good to be back on the airwaves with everyone and glad to be here.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was a big week for us on the Mako team. We try and do coverage of election outcomes. So, Tuesday is a big day for democracy. It's also a big day for county governments because in Maryland, it's county governments and our staff and professionals and all the judges and volunteers who are really on the ground floor of making it all work. So it's one of the fundamental things we do to make the whole process work. And that's still underway. But this is like local government on display and on showcase this week. So a lot of stuff to write about and a lot of stuff to talk about. I think, these elections, a lot of people like to focus on the federal issues, and the newspapers will go into all this detailed coverage about what it means for party here and what it means for that state or that governor or that senator or whatever. But we're on the Maryland beat, and I think we've got a lot to talk about from here in Maryland, mostly at the local government level.
Right. So, of course, a lot to get into. And today we do want to take some time to talk about the general election here in Maryland. We have a lot of outcomes in hand. Some races are still up in the air as votes are still being counted, and we will get into that. And, of course, some interesting ballot issues to talk about at the local and state level. But, Michael, first, I know you wanted to say a few things about a good friend and mentor.
Yeah, I really do. And I appreciate getting a minute to talk about Sheila Hickson. Delegate Hickson was chair of the House Ways and Means Committee for a really long time and a leader in the legislative body. She passed away just earlier this week, and I didn't want to miss the opportunity, since we have an audience, just to tell some people who didn't know about Sheila Hickson what you missed out on. She's just one of the people in my life who I will never forget. And I think it's a great thing over the course of a career or over a lifetime to run into people that are just fascinating and interesting and inspiring and exciting. And Sheila Hickson was all those things. She was a really good chair of the Ways and Means Committee, but that doesn't do her justice. She was involved on environmental issues before she moved over to Ways and Means. And some of the unsexy stuff. What do you do with sewage sludge and that sort of stuff? But, you need to settle those things as matters of policy. She continued to convene the sludge committee for decades after her work was done on environmental matters because she made so many friends along the way. And I was lucky enough to be professional staff in the Maryland General Assembly. I was assigned to work with the House Ways and Means Committee back in the day when Sheila first became chair of that committee. And so for those of you who have come to public hearings and so forth, you know that the committee chair sort of sits at the front of the room, and usually there's a professional staff person who sits right next to the chair. So that was her as chair and me as that, young, bright-eyed staff person. So she was the political and I was the professional, but we had a really close working relationship, and I don't know, got to learn to count on each other in tons of ways. When it came time for me to pursue this job to lead Mako, she had my back and made phone calls on my behalf and was trying to convince people that I was up to the job and the kind of person that they ought to pick. And I was very, very grateful for her doing that. But anyway, just so many memories. Love her to death. She was way ahead on a bunch of social issues that today have come to pass, but she was leading the charge on a number of things decades ago before they were trending and before they were popular and really about to happen. I don't know, just we all owe a debt to Sheila Hickson for her leadership and service. Love her, love her, love her. Can't wait for a service. I guess we're going to have a memorial service in January in Annapolis for her many, many friends and acquaintances from over the years. Wild horses could not keep me away from an event like that. Love you, Sheila Hickson. We'll miss you.
Well said. And, I've had the opportunity to meet with her and talk to her. Of course, I wasn't around as much when she was really in her prime, but I did get to interact with her a bunch. As she was leaving, I remember we had a really cool dinner with her, and one of the most approachable people in every way. And you can just see the outpouring on social media and elsewhere, just people really touched, like you said, Michael. And what you said was deep and impactful. And you see that, reverberating all over the place. So I look forward as well to the service in January. It certainly will be a packed house. And, we all miss her and wish her family the best. And it's going to be hard to get through this podcast today, but we do have to do that. So, Victoria, I'm going to let you try to transition into what we're talking about today and kind of put you on the spot here.
Absolutely. Such an incredible legacy of public service. And I'm thankful that we're able to give some spotlight to that. And now we have a brand new crop of individuals who have made that same commitment to public service. And that's what we want to get into today. And that's why we're here. So we'll start to unpack the general election results together. And Kevin, I know you've been working most closely with all the policy and administrative side of things. So maybe let's start there. I know some people dislike that we are still counting ballots, but overall, it seemed like this general election was pretty smooth. What's your take on that?
Yeah, definitely. And, if you look back at the July primary, we're certainly in a much better place than where we were in July in terms of counting ballots after Election Day. So quick reminder, we talked a lot about this. And during the last legislative session, MAKO was sort of leading the charge with our advocates and partners in the General Assembly to change the process for mail-in ballots. We know that we knew we were going to have a lot for this primary and general election, a lot of people voting by mail. We got into that in the pandemic. It's something that I think sticks around. It's just too easy, right? You can request a ballot, you can either mail it back or you can drop it in one of the ballot drop boxes across the state. And so the problem was, you have all these mail-in ballots and they're sitting there, and you can't, under current law, you cannot begin to process them, which means open the ballots, get them ready to be tabulated until Thursday after the election, right? And for large jurisdictions that have tons and tons of mail-in ballots, that slows things down, of course, because you can't even begin to deal with those until after the election. So, of course, in July, we saw that. We saw several weeks in some cases where we didn't have results. And thankfully, the courts here in Maryland said, hey, we're going to allow our local boards, we're going to authorize them to start opening and tabulating before the polls close on Election Day. We passed a bill. It was vetoed. So the court stepped in. The State Board of Elections went to them and said, we need to do this. We need to make sure that we don't have these delays. And so the courts authorized local boards to do that. Some did, some did not. But overall, things are pretty smooth. We do have, a few things about equipment failing and whatnot. That's normal. All of that was handled, I think, relatively easily and well. So hats off to our local leaders, our election administrators, and of course, all of the people who showed up and served as judges, people working at the polling places, and of course, all the people right now in those counties that chose not to start canvassing early, that are counting those ballots accurately. I mean, it's really hard work. It's important. And I just want to say, too, for the counties that didn't decide to canvass early, many of them, they're not going to have a ton, so they could handle it. And for some that maybe do, I don't think it was because they wanted to delay the results. I think that the court stepped in, but it was a little late in the game. So some counties said, hey, at this point, we don't have the space. We don't have the personnel. If we would have done this, if we would have known about this beforehand, we would have been able to be ready. So it wasn't like, I think there wasn't anything nefarious here where they just said, hey, we think that delaying the results is fine. It was literally that they had already made so many decisions and they had already put so many pieces into place. It was kind of hard to unravel that, but we will have results pretty soon. I'm pretty confident of that. So overall, really, really smooth. And I'm really proud of all of the people working hard at the local level. Counties run elections, and I think it was a really good showing.
Right. Really important context for our listeners there, especially about mail-in ballots. So we all count on our system working fairly and smoothly, and that's so important. Keep our democracy running, and this seemed pretty successful. So let's talk about a couple of the outcomes. So first, Michael, what is still up in the air?
Well, we've got a couple of races at the county level that are pretty similarly situated, and these are in pretty large jurisdictions, so they're getting some attention in the media. It's going to be a while till this gets fully untangled because of the continued ballot counting. But in Frederick County and Anne Arundel County, both of these jurisdictions elect a county executive countywide as the head of the executive branch of their charter government. And both of those jurisdictions have relatively close races that I think are effectively too close to call, at least right now. And in Frederick County, a sitting state senator, Michael Huff, is ahead of a current member of the county council, Jessica Fitzwater. So he has a lead on her. And in Anne Arundel County, a sitting council member, Jessica Hare, has a lead right now among the ballots counted in Anne Arundel over the incumbent county executive, Stuart Pittman. So in both cases, there is a lead for the Republican candidate, but we have ballots yet to be counted. And in general, it seems like the general nature of who votes when in Maryland and in other places, as we're going to mail-in ballots, it seems like more registered Democrats and Democrat-aligned voters have been voting, by mail-in and even early voting. So there's a possible skew in the votes remaining to be counted, and it sounds like a lot of election watchers are considering both of these races in play because of that possible skew. So that's probably where you start. Two big jurisdictions that are relatively purple. Everybody expected those county executive races to be competitive and relatively close. That has played out in the votes we've counted, and then there's still some more work to be done on both of those.
Right. And I'd say both of those leads are narrow enough that they really are too close to call. And, it's because of those outstanding mail-in ballots. And Michael, you mentioned it. I think it's clear that Democrats are voting by mail the most, right? It's Democrats over Republicans, and that's public information. So these campaigns, they can tell how many ballots have been returned and by which party. So they know the votes that are left out there. And if they can look at that and figure, okay, most of these are going to stick with us, and some of those are going to stick with them, you can kind of do the math. And that's what's going on right now. I know that people are furiously checking and trying to align, where are the votes, which votes are outstanding. So it's fascinating to see that play out. But again, mail-in ballots, provisional, a provisional ballot, if you show up and there's an issue with your voter registration or you've moved, whatever the case may be, if there's any issue, you can vote provisionally, which means you still can vote, but they just set that ballot aside. And then later on, you have to decide whether or not that vote should be counted. There's a whole process for that. So some of those are still outstanding, but the majority of these outstanding votes are the mail-in ballots. And again, these campaigns can see where those ballots are coming from and which party voted them. So interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, you can bet that a lot of folks who are interested in state and local politics across Maryland and elsewhere, but in Maryland, I'm sure there are dozens of folks who have set up spreadsheets and they're running the numbers, how many ballots appear to be outstanding, and what if 55% break this way, or 58% break this way, or 62% break this way, and everybody's got a theory of how these things are going to land. So, that's interesting sport to engage in, but I think there's a lot of that cooking right now. I would say in Anne Arundel in particular, one of the jurisdictions you mentioned that didn't feel that they had the setup or the lead time to do the advanced counting of mail-in ballots. I can't remember what the number is, but it's something like 40,000 ballots they're just started opening and processing this morning. We're recording on Thursday. So in Anne Arundel, with that big wave of ballots fully uncounted, in what's been reported so far, it's not just the county executive race, but with that pocket of ballots that are still coming, I think there's at least a couple of seats on the county council among the elected officials that we know who are part of MACO, but also probably a few unsettled races in the state legislature. maybe a couple of the state Senate seats and one or two House of Delegate seats are similarly situated, that they look like close races. They were relatively purple districts. And we're going to have to wait a few days at least, probably, before you can put punctuation at the end of these races. A few of them still too close to call.
Exactly right. And there's maybe, a handful of other races that are close here and there, and in other parts of the state. Probably 6 to 8 county races across Maryland are still in flux until these mail-in ballots are counted fully.
Right. Yeah.
And that's going to become a bit typical, right? I mean, we've got to wait for these ballots to get counted. And I mean, hopefully people entered into this with the expectation that there would be a little bit of time before we had final pictures on everything. But we understand the frustration there too.
Yeah, I think, Maryland has been among a wide number of states to try and make it practical for voters to participate through a variety of means. Right. So the state now sends out an opportunity to apply for a mail-in ballot. You don't have to seek that out. We basically prompt you if you want a mail-in ballot. You don't have to claim that you're going to be out of the state like you had to decades ago if you wanted to vote absentee. You can just say, I prefer to vote by mail. You can set that up as a recurring thing. If you'd rather vote at the early voting sites, there are multiple sites in the big counties. Every county has a location for early voting. So you get a multi-day window just in the event that election day is too cumbersome for you or your work schedule prohibits you from getting out on election day. We want to give everybody an opportunity to participate, but that means you end up getting ballots in multiple ways over a stretch of time. The counting and processing is more complicated. And so, we put up with this being a little different than we grew up with, on television on Tuesday night. You knew everything by midnight. We're not going to be like that for a while. And it's because we've made a decision to open up the process more widely.
So true. And Michael, what other big takeaways do we have to share with the listeners?
We've done a rundown on the county races on the Conduit Street blog, and I'd point people in that direction, both for what's happened so far. We did a big summary of sort of what's happened to all of our county incumbents who decided to run, who ran for other seats, and what's happened to all those county races. We'll continue to update that. So in the days ahead, you can keep visiting the Conduit Street blog for the latest updates as new counts come in and so forth. I think sometimes people want to focus on partisan change, and we get a lot of that at the federal level, right? Everybody's watching the needle. Who's going to control the U.S. Senate? Is it going to be Team Red or Team Blue? Who's going to control the House of Representatives? All that sort of stuff is part of the spirit of a national election, where there's a little bit of that in the state legislature, not a whole lot. And to be candid, not really much of a story there at the county level. You go through the results in the county races, and you keep in mind, we just drew new districts in Maryland, both for the state legislature and for counties. Our legislative bodies, or the governing bodies of the counties, have just gone through their own redistricting, but like relatively minor change in partisan representation in various districts. I don't have a full count at the moment, in part because we've got a few races that are too close to call, but I think we only have one county where the governing body is going to change its majority party. In Dorchester County, they're a charter county that has a county council as their governing body, and it looks like they're going to shift from a 3-2 Democratic majority to a 3-2 Republican majority. But I don't think there's any reason to expect a really bold sort of policy or ideological shift there. I'm not sure that there's a really broad difference in philosophy there. I guess we've mentioned Arundel and Frederick with those county exec races and some close races in their council still up in the air. Both of those are purple counties, so there's possibility for a little different temperament if things go, if either of those jurisdictions go red in the executive branch or in their governing bodies. But party-wise, that's probably it. There's really not a lot not to report there. If you were looking for a big punchline of some partisan undercurrent to the Maryland local government election, you're going to be disappointed. There's not a whole lot.
And yeah, that's fair. But to be honest, I mean, there's really not all that much in county government that is deeply red or blue. Maybe in your budget, sometimes in growth and planning issues, we see that. But most of our work is practical rather than partisan. So we know that budgets are priorities, and sometimes you see a tinge of red or blue that plays out there. But generally speaking, like, we're not dealing with abortions, we're not dealing with guns. County government is pretty straightforward. We provide frontline services to our residents, and the only disagreements really that show up that are partisan, again, are mostly around the edges. So nothing surprising there, and it's not red blue, and it's not something that we expected to play out in that way. So I think all that stuff is state and fed level, right? Like, counties, we serve people, that's what we do, and that's not partisan.
Right. We hear that joke all the time. There's no such thing as a red or blue pothole. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, thankfully, there aren't red and blue potholes out there. Can you imagine? Ooh, that'd be a lot to take on. So shifting gears just a little bit for us. So we've had an awful lot of coverage on county races on our Conduit Street blog, which we've mentioned a couple times, and that's out in boxes everywhere. And from the stats I'm seeing, I'm on the back end of the blog seeing, how many views we get, how many unique visitors. There have been an exorbitant amount of people using our coverage too to find out, what's going on, because we need that county, local level coverage of what's happening.
Yes, we try to really be on top of that. And, I know that the stuff of ballot questions, that stuff is certainly important. And I know a lot of people are interested. So it's good for us, and it's difficult, but it's good to get that summary out there just to process all the stuff that we're seeing. I think it's helpful for us to sort of write that out, and also, get a feel for what is going on in all these different counties. And then, of course, the statewide stuff as well.
Exactly, Kevin. And your coverage of the ballot questions that you mentioned there, that in particular received a lot of attention. I think, as we mentioned, people, they want to understand what those questions mean and the context behind them. So maybe you can walk our listeners through a little bit of that blog that went out.
Sure. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think that blog should get a bunch of hits. I'm glad people are interested in what's going on with these ballot questions. So there were 5 questions. And as a reminder, to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot, it does require approval by 3/5 of the Maryland Senate and Maryland House of Delegates. So this stuff was put on the ballot by the legislature, and there were 5 questions. So the big one is cannabis, and we can talk about that. But let's quickly go through the other 4. So the first one, question 1, look, it just proposes to rename the Maryland Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court of Maryland and the Maryland Court of Special Appeals to the Appellate Court of Maryland. Pretty standard, right? No one understands that the Maryland Court of Appeals is the highest court in Maryland. I think it makes sense. People understand what Supreme Court means. So really, this is pretty standard stuff. Like, Maryland is one of only 2 states, other one being New York, that does not refer to their state's top court as Supreme Court. So that one right now, unofficial results, 73% of Marylanders endorse that measure. I mean, what do you think, Victoria? You're not from Maryland, so you come here and you're like, what the heck is the Maryland Court of Appeals? Is that the highest court or the second highest, right? That just seems to make sense, right?
I mean, right. Some of these questions are just logical, and it's kind of crazy that we even have to come to the place where we have to vote on such things to just make logical sense. But it's important. I mean, we've got a lot of people coming and going from the state of Maryland, so might as well keep things easy and simple for people to follow along with what's going on.
Yes, and I agree. The second question, this one has to do with primary residences for candidates that want to represent their districts in their statewide districts and elections. So this is for delegates and senators. And basically what this says is that those candidates, they have to maintain a primary residence in the district that they wish to represent for at least 6 months before an election. So what this is saying essentially is you can't just run for office in a district where you maintain a temporary or a part-time residence. I think this one, again, most people look at this and say, yes, that makes sense. And 89% of Marylanders endorse this measure as well. So again, really, really high number on that one.
We've been in a weird spot for, I don't know, somewhere around 20 years where a court case over residency requirements to serve in the legislature has basically been what controls the law for around 20 years or so. And it was a squishy decision. So the idea to make it clearer, articulate it in the Constitution, put it before the voters, is to some degree just a way to have increased clarity for everyone's benefit. And I think that's a noble aspiration.
Yes, I agree. And so just moving through these, the third question also, again, passes really comfortably. This is, well, not as comfortably, 62%. This basically says that to get a jury trial, it increases the number from 15,000 in question to 25,000. So currently, someone cannot demand a jury trial in a civil case if the amount in controversy does not exceed 15,000. This says it needs to be 25,000. Again, I think people understand like 15,000. Yeah, it's not chump change, but in order to sit a jury, that takes time and people have to go in and it's a whole thing, right? So bumping that up to 25,000, I think does make some sense. You still can go in and for a civil trial for 15,000, you're just not going to get a jury trial. You can't demand that. So now it's going to be 25. And again, 62% of Marylanders endorse this measure. So pretty hefty sum of voters endorsing that one. And question 5, we'll go back to cannabis, but for question 5, this is a weird one. I don't think anybody really understood it and understood why. Like if I live in Anne Arundel, I'm voting for something that says Howard County. This is about the Orphans Court. And Orphans Court, for what it's worth, these are courts that deal with probate issues and wills. Doesn't really make sense. Maybe we should rename that court on the next one, right? But this basically says that Howard County Circuit Court judges would serve as Orphans Court judges. Right now, they are elected. There are requirements for Orphans Court judges. They vary by jurisdiction, but this just says no more electing them. We're just going to have the Circuit Court judges serve as the Orphans Court judges in Howard County. There are 2 counties that already do that, Montgomery County and Harford County. In those jurisdictions, the Circuit Court judges already serve as the Orphans Court, so they don't have a special election there. This would just say the same thing in Howard, and 66% of Maryland voters endorse this measure. So again, not very close on any of these questions. Moving back to cannabis, the big one, we fully expected Marylanders to agree to endorse the idea for adult use cannabis, to legalize adult use cannabis and regulate and tax. This question 4 authorizes individuals 21 years of age or older to use and possess marijuana. It also directs now the General Assembly to pass laws to provide for the use, distribution, possession, regulation, and taxation of cannabis within the state. So now that Marylanders have endorsed this question, the General Assembly has to get to work. We've talked about our initiative on cannabis and what we'd like to see as that rolls out, but a lot of work left to be done. I think there's some worry that voters think that now they've said yes, that all of a sudden cannabis is legal and, it's all worked out. They could have done that. And they did pass some bills that automatically go into effect, but nothing in terms of how we're going to regulate and legalize and how we're going to decide where these things go and the tax structure. So all that still has to be worked out here, and that should take some time. But the idea here would be this would all go into effect, I think, by 2024. So the General Assembly is going to have to come back. That'll probably be one of the biggest issues of the session. As we know, a lot of equity concerns, a lot of structure concerns. How do you do this? Who gets the licenses? How do you tax it? But again, 66% of Marylanders so far, again, unofficial results, have endorsed this measure. So passes quite comfortably, and that's what we expected.
I think that's in line with what polling had suggested, right? I mean, Dr. Cromer and the Goucher poll had asked this question of Maryland voters, and it looked like this was going to pass pretty comfortably in Maryland. For what it's worth, I think we'll see some breakdown of this, but it looks like legal cannabis finally ran out of its win streak, passed in Maryland, and there's one other state that passed it, I think, this week, but a few states, the voters said no. Right? North and South Dakota both had adult use cannabis on the ballot, and both of them said no. And I believe Arkansas also voted it down. I think that might be the first time the question's been before voters where the statewide referendum went negative. So, maybe this issue has run its course, Maryland being among the last to get in. Who knows what will happen at the federal level and so forth, but that's just interesting as a matter of policy. It seems like the American populace is behind it for the most part, but maybe that's not as uniform as you might have thought. And then you mentioned all the implementation issues that, since this is, the county podcast to some degree, do want to make mention. I think there are some county government issues and sort of deference to communities and deference to the level of government that will bear the burden of implementation and public safety and zoning and all those sorts of things as this new industry gets propped up in Maryland. So county should be at the table for those discussions ahead, but the voters have said green light, tally ho.
Well, there you have it. And I mean, Michael, we aren't like some of the Western states where the ballot questions can totally overrun an election, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. How do we say California without exactly saying California? So, right. Yeah, right. So we end up with these issues are constitutional amendments, like Kevin mentioned, and not simply somebody with a clipboard gets to put some new policy idea before all the voters. We don't have the open initiative process like some of the Western states. So that's, in my judgment, a good thing. Election night gets really tricky when there are 39 things on the ballot.
Exactly. Okay, so there are also some questions at the local level that are noteworthy that we saw on the ballots, right?
Right. So our charter counties here in Maryland, these are mostly the largest jurisdictions. They can put questions directly to the voters as a charter amendment. So some of these are sort of ministerial, but some are real policy changes. In Baltimore City, voters approved a charter amendment about the city police department becoming a city-managed entity rather than technically under the state, which it is right now. And some of these, when you look at these charter questions, I don't think some people even understand, like they don't even know or realize that things are the way they are until they see it on the ballot.
Yeah, I think, that's the issue with the Baltimore City Police Department. I mean, prior to a couple of years ago in the state legislature, where one of the things that the legislature passed as part of its police reforms was to re-grant local autonomy to the Baltimore Police Department, because up until now, it has basically been a state agency that functions within the city of Baltimore. And almost nobody knew that was the case. I mean, if you're a real insider in Maryland politics, maybe you did, but I'm sure most voters and city residents would have had no idea. So that was kind of a weirdly worded question to basically establish a city police department. And how could you not look around and say, well, what about the cops I see that have Baltimore Police Department on the side of the car or on the uniform? Who are they? Right. So
right.
Maybe a quirky thing, but you always have to come up with a short, clear wording for these, complicated changes to the charter or the Constitution.
And along those lines, Michael, we also had 2 jurisdictions who passed questions about term limits for their local elected representatives.
Right. So Baltimore City also had a question to go into their charter to create a 2-term limit for the Baltimore City Council members. They did not have a term limit to this point, but voters in Baltimore approved that change. So that will become now in effect the limit for service on the Baltimore City Council. I don't recall how that's phased in and how it affects sitting members, but going forward, there'll be a 2-term limit for council member to be elected. Anne Arundel County also had a question regarding term limits, but theirs was different. In Anne Arundel County, up till now, we've had term limits. I'm an Anne Arundel County voter. I saw this question on my ballot. In Anne Arundel, we have a 2-term limit for the council, but the question for the voters was to extend the term limit to now be 3 terms rather than 2. And that also passed. Voters approved that in Anne Arundel County. And I feel like the wording there was pretty curious. So, I mean, you look at these 2 jurisdictions right next to one another, and voters said yes to term limits in Baltimore City. And they then in Anne Arundel County effectively said yes to extending term limits in Anne Arundel County. But the wording of the question that was on the ballot in Anne Arundel, I'm not really sure that it made it clear to voters who might not be aware that they already had a term limit of 2 terms and then this was extending. I mean, it basically read to me, I don't have the wording in front of me, but the wording was, shall they be limited to 3 terms? And without the context, I could imagine some voters reading that and feeling like, oh, I'm for term limits. I'm going to vote for this.
Yes, and no doubt. Yeah. No doubt. And I'm also an Anne Arundel County voter. And I mean, just talking to people who say, hey, I'm for term limits. I'm like, well, do you know what you just voted for? You just voted to increase from 2 to 3. the maximum number of terms for a council member. So I certainly agree. It is a weird instance where, there was no mention of, hey, by the way, they're already limited to 2. So what you're doing by voting yes is extending that to 3 terms. And no, I really don't think people understood that. So that is a quirky instance, Michael. And, I think if you look at Baltimore City and then you look at Arundel, both passed overwhelmingly. And if you have to wonder if the question in Arundel said increasing from 2 to 3 as the maximum number of terms, whether or not that would have changed people's minds, and we wouldn't have seen the kind of numbers in Baltimore and Anne Arundel in terms of people saying, I'm for term limits, right? Like right. It is a weird instance.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a tricky circumstance to be in if you're at the state level. I know it's the Office of the Attorney General and the Secretary of State develop the language. I'm sure in each county, in each charter county, that's a designated responsibility. And for the most part, your charge is to state as simply and plainly as possible what the proposal would do. So you're basically under direction to not include narrative or background. There is no paragraph of explanation. It's just, this is what the new words of the law would affect. And so, I get the idea that our job is not to give a broad context and rationale. It's merely to describe the change, describe what the new law would look like. So I don't think there's anything that was inaccurate about the wording of the Anne Arundel County question. It's just a matter of, did voters come away with a sense of the context? And I don't know. I think that's a jump ball. I don't think someone failed in that exercise. I just think it's a tricky ask to ask a human being to perfectly encapsulate without any body language what the proposal would be. So it's a tough thing to do. That's sometimes the nature of this work, I guess.
Absolutely. And Michael, just on term limits, whatever people thought about the Anne Arundel question, I think most people thought they were voting just, generally for term limits. We saw in Baltimore City. I don't know about you, but I'll go out on a limb and say it. Like I have mixed feelings, but ultimately I'm against term limits. And I understand all the arguments for term limits. I understand that it's harder to beat an incumbent. And so when you say, well, if you don't like the person representing you, just vote them out. And I get it. I'm not naive to the fact that it is harder to beat an incumbent. But at the same time, I mean, I know legislators who are really, really good at their jobs and that they dedicate their lives to this for not much money, right? They do it because they love it and they're really good at constituent services. And for me, I don't want to not be given that choice to elect the person who's done so much for me, so much for my district, right? In any given scenario. I think that taking that away is antithetical to democracy, right? Like, I understand the rationale for the people who think that we need them. But again, I just think that, sure, there are instances where it's really hard to beat somebody who's not doing a great job. I get it. But for the most part, I think that the people who do this work aren't doing it for the money, right? They're doing it because they care. They're doing it because they have connections within their communities. And you lose all of that when you just throw someone out because of a law. And you lose all that knowledge, you lose all those connections. And to me, it just doesn't make sense. If somebody's really good at something, let them keep doing it. As long as people keep voting them in and they keep doing a really good job, I don't see the need to throw them out just because the law says they have to go. And that's my soapbox. I'll jump off it, but that's how I feel about it.
I think what this amounts to is it's a tension between political theory and real world practice, right? So, I mean, I think the case against term limits is mostly grounded in political theory that, like, you just made a nice argument that as long as the voters continue to support this candidate, why should we substitute our judgment for theirs and deny them that right by saying, not after this term, not after 2 terms or 3 terms or whatever? Why would we arbitrarily deny voters the right to support the candidate that they might choose? So as a classroom level, academic level matter of political theory, I find that very compelling. And I'm more or less inclined to side with you, I think. But I'm sure the argument on the other side in practice is that, the advantages of incumbency are so powerful that they effectively distort the voting process. And I think that's usually the argument made on behalf of term limits at any level, is we're better mandating cycling of our leadership so people don't become so entrenched and such a household name that, it becomes virtually impossible for challengers to defeat incumbents. And so cycle out the incumbents one way or another. I remember, a political pundit once said, term limits are a bad idea whose time has come. And I think a lot of people have made their peace with it along those lines. So I don't know, it's an open debate. It's not exactly our lane to be in, but it is sort of the flavor of the month, right?
Yeah. And I know it's sold in that way. And again, like the other way to look at this is, sometimes there are people who don't get what they want. And, maybe they shouldn't get what they want, but they want to spend money and they want to push whatever they're looking for. And maybe they get to a point where it's like, well, I'm not going to get what I want with these elected officials. So let me just throw them out of office. And then I'll be able to go and make my pitch to other people. So like, you have to look at both sides of this. I'm not saying that's what went on here in Maryland. Like, I'm not saying that at all. But in many instances across the country, there are organized efforts to do just that, right? You can't make way with an elected body. And so you say, instead of just trying to, pound my head against the wall, I'm just going to create a situation where they all have to go. And then I can bring in all these new people and push my ideas that way. So I understand the argument you just made, and I'm going to push back with this other side of it, which is, there are people who want to do this because they want to get their ideas through, and maybe their ideas aren't what's best for the community. And if you have a whole new slate of people who don't have the institutional knowledge, don't know the history of the issues as well as people before them did, that just creates a situation that I don't want to be a part of. And I worry that, you start to go down that lane, and that's what can happen. So again, not saying that's the case here in Maryland, but there is another side to this that I think people should think about.
So this is where we tell our listeners that there's going to be like a subscriber only podcast where you and I fight out term limits over like 3.5 hours. And this is for the diehards. I used to make a joke it was for the OnlyFans account, but some folks found that off color. So anyway, the subscriber only, if you're on the Patreon site, that's sort of okay. So anyway, that's where we would have this off ramp to tell folks, if you want 4 more hours of this, tune in later.
Or just email me, and I'll like go meet up with somebody at the Starbucks and like talk for 4 hours about term limits. Like, no problem. I'm in for that. So Victoria, hopefully you can get us back on track here.
I'll try my best here.
Yeah, I know term limits are interesting. Like, again, we can talk about it all day, but there are a few more things I know we need to get into.
Yes, and for the sake of time, I'm holding my tongue and not throwing my hat into the term limit conversation ring, but for another day, as we say. So there's an awful lot going on after every election, and this has been a good quick run through. I mean, we do our best to try and encapsulate everything we can in a quick 45 minutes. Kevin, is there anything more you want to get to?
Well, I mean, there's an awful lot going on after every election. You can turn on any news channel and watch the talking heads, but I'm quite sure that no one's going to mention this item. And Michael, this is back on brand. And it sounds like there's been a historic party change over in Guam. So, Michael, are you aware of this? Have you seen this? Because, they're not talking about it. The talking heads are not talking about this. You got to dig pretty deep to get this.
Right. Or you have to come to the Conduit Street Podcast, because
that's right.
we have a long time affinity for Guam and their special brand of politics. So, I'm happy to hear that Guam should be back in the fold. Maybe this is our chance, our chance to get that remote recorded podcast that we've been talking about. Maybe this is it. I don't know.
I hope so.
We need more coverage for sure. We need more coverage.
I love it. And I mean, if anyone's newer to the podcast and you don't know what the heck's going on with this whole Guam mention, I'm almost in the same boat as you. I'd never heard about this until I started digging into the podcast and producing it. And now it's just a fun Easter egg, a little treasure hunt for longtime listeners. Oh, did you hear the episode where Guam came up again? Oh, yeah. I'm an insider. I got that one.
Yeah, I mean, we are very sincere in our interest in Guam, and it goes way back. But, every once in a while we'll throw it in. And for the longtime listeners, they will understand exactly what we're talking about. But you'll have to go back, or again, ask us one time if you see us somewhere, what the heck is your interest in Guam? Why do you care? It seems really weird. It is weird, but it does have a long history, and we love Guam. We really do. So, Michael, I'm all in. I want to go do the remote recording, but I'll be the nerd. Like, I'm not going to be hanging out on the beach. I'm going to be walking around. I want to see all the government buildings. I want to know the history. Like, you don't want to take me on vacation if you want to relax. If people didn't know that already, like, I'm not that person. I want to know. I want to see what's going on. So if you didn't know already, now you do. But Michael, if we go to Guam, there will be no beach time. I know you'll have your sunscreen and your shades, and you'll be listening to podcasts. I'm going to be running around digging into Guam. Yeah.
You'll be in the gallery of the Senate of Guam, with your like reporter's notebook and one of those like media hats on, the tip of your pencil on your tongue as you're taking all these notes and stuff. I love it. I love every bit about it. So it's good.
Oh my gosh, so good.
You know it. Well, Victoria, look, this was great. I always love having you in the fold. We do need to give Victoria a shout out. Victoria is our producer. She is the one who cleans up all of our mistakes on the podcast, who makes us sound better. We're recording remotely. There's only so much she can do, but she makes it, trust me, she makes the end product way better than it is when she gets it. So big shout out to you. I think we should take a few minutes to say that to you and express our thanks. And our listeners, look, you're lucky to have Victoria, because again, the end product comes out a lot better than it did when it went in. So Victoria, thank you for all the hard work behind the scenes. I know that it's difficult sometimes when you're not, the on the air, if you will, but the work that you do, I know it, I did it, I know it, I do it. You're the one who makes this podcast tick. So I'm very, very grateful to you. And I know Michael is too. So thank you. And I just wanted to take a second to say that.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. Now I feel like the red carpet's been rolled out for me.
Always. It's a lot of work. So Michael, any closing thoughts from you before we wrap up? We're done talking about Guam. We're done talking about term limits. I think we've gone through pretty well what went down here in Maryland. Not many huge surprises, a few things outstanding. Anything else for you before we wrap it up?
I think just stay tuned to the usual channels. So over the days ahead, we're going to continue to update the things that we're watching on the Conduit Street blog. That's the easiest place to track when a new wave of ballots gets counted and added. We're going to be watching Frederick. We'll watch Hartford. We'll watch Arundel, the other places where there are things that are close and in play. Keep an eye on it, and when we know, you'll know.
All right, that sounds good. Sounds fair. We'll leave it there for today. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and subscribe. That way, all of these episodes will be sent directly to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, the Conduit Street blog. But for Michael Sanderson and for our producer, Victoria Maas, this is Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.